Well, thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Key Metrics in Major Giving Fundraising and Why Visits this Fiscal Year Should Not Be One of Them. Some of you will recognize this title from a couple of years ago, but we've augmented it with a fairly extensive survey of the industry to understand what metrics are currently being used and what kind of a job they're doing. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to come back and use what we think are more strategic measures and metrics to actually run through a role play of a development team pool of field officers and their prospects and sort of talk through how you would actually use something like this. So there's two parts to this. The premise here is that metrics should be coaching tips and that the data helps tell stories about what's working, what's not. It highlights best practices and is best used interactively with the teams. And by that we mean both managers sitting in a room with their field officers, usually together and driving a discussion. And again, we're going to role play one of those a little later. But we've also got some great stories from our clients where field officers will do this themselves. I just was at a session where one field officer, Mark, stood up and talked about how he and Allie were using this because one of them was getting prospects closed better, the other was getting them qualified into early stages better. And they actually had complementary skills, and the data got this story out, and they started talking about it on their own. And we love that self-service, transparency, people working together. So high level, we believe metrics should do this kind of stuff, tell stories and help the teams bring them out and be coaching tips. And they should not be used as thou shalts or thou shalt not. And as we go through this, these metrics aren't hard and fast, but you'll see they relate to each other and they help tell stories. So as we do a lot of work in this industry, and we've observed that the industry practices, and there's a bunch of benchmarks out there, largely around measuring visits, aren't working. We asked the question why, and our hypothesis is that they're focused on development officer activities, which is all this visit stuff, how many asks have been made and all of that, versus actually cultivating a prospect. And we're going to go through a survey where we try to explore this, and then our views from our work on kind of how we understand it better. But there's a big difference between having a field officer measured and driven to make a lot of visits versus having them understand how to move a complex prospect from like maybe mature cultivation into solicitation and get the right ask for the right purpose in front of that man or woman and help get it over the line and close. So there's, I think, some very different things you can use the data to do here. So we did a survey. We sent it out to 2,900 prospect research and development managers, mostly in the US, some overseas. We had 34 responses. You'll see this is a fairly long survey, so a 1.2% response rate is pretty good. We also did 3 in-depth interviews, and I'm going to caveat that this is mostly not our clients. We would hope that our clients would do something different than this, but I just wanted to say that. So the first question we asked is, what are your current gift officer performance goals? And dollars raised in the fiscal year, 94% of the respondents said that was a goal, and that's a good one because you actually want to raise money, although I would argue that's the end goal, that's the result. So ideally you would have some things along the way that help you understand how the prospects are being cultivated. The next biggest one by far was visits in the fiscal year to date, which is 60% of the respondents roughly measure how many visits has the field officer made this fiscal year to date. Which one of our points in this you'll see is this is kind of crazy because right now it's June, so it's going to be a lot. Say everybody's they're doing well, they've got 100. And then in a few months it's going to be August, and if you're doing well, you've got 15, and it's really hard to, what's 15 versus 100 actually mean? And then does the prospect actually care that your fiscal year was June 30th, so there've been some visits in the summer or not? I mean, most prospects see energy and momentum over like a year or a 2-year period, and they're also more driven by calendar year end because of tax purposes. So there seems, in our view, to be a misalignment between measuring this and actually what the prospect feels. But the other measure, asks in the fiscal year, contacts, visits per month, cash received, new prospects identified, stage moves. We're going to look at time and stage a little later. Stage moves, I think, was like how many moves are made from one stage to another at the field officer level versus how long has the prospect actually been in a stage. Visits per week, dollars asked. Then qualitative goals, 3% in yield rate. So this is actually surprising because yield rate is meant to be of the solicitations I put out, how many actually closed, which to us would seem to be a fairly substantial goal. but it's one of the smaller ones. So the bigger ones are these. And then we asked a follow-on question. What percentage of your field officer compensation is tied to metrics? And we do a bunch of work in commercial sales where it would be like 90%. No, it would be 90% of the salespeople would have typically half of their compensation tied to metrics. We were surprised. Almost 65% have no compensation tied to metrics, including revenue. And then another, have less than 10%, another 20%. So it's like 85% of the survey base said that less than 10% of their field officers' compensation is tied to any kind of metric. That's subject for thought, and you'll see this comes up in some of the comments in a few minutes. So then we asked, can you ascribe improved performance to the use of these metrics? We suspected this might be the case, but we paraphrase this a little bit to group them, but 30% said sadly no. Like, we're measuring these things, but we're not seeing a benefit. Another 23% had said it's too early to tell. 20% said more visits and better data. Now, I would argue this is actually what you want. You're measuring a development team, and the outcome is more visits and better data. Shouldn't the outcome be like this one, donor performance has been improved, or we got more revenue? Unfortunately, that's only 1 in 6 actually said this, which is the measure I would think you would want. Some said not clear, and I think it was 1 actually said we had a decline. We have worse performance because we're measuring things, which is also a bit surprising, but then we asked them why. And there were a bunch of comments about, and this is just, I took one of them literally as it came in, there is no reward penalty tied to the achievement of failure. They are simple benchmarks for excellence, which is sort of one of our hypotheses. Like, if you don't attach compensation, like, what's the big deal? And then you look at the next one came up. We actually have the wrong metrics. They are not focused on cultivating prospects and maximizing revenue, which is, again, our hypothesis going in. We'll go more into this as we go through this talk. Metrics can be gamed. That is, field officers become fixated on metrics to the point that they actually lose gifts. And one example of this is if you measure somebody to metrics and the goal is 100 metrics in a fiscal year or whatever, and is getting to be May and they're behind, they can go, and you see an example of this, they can have 10 lunches with a friend over the next 5 weeks or something, and they can sort of jam the system like this if it's not well managed. And I think that's what this is referring to. And then this one, there is not any real focus on the metrics outside of the initial development plans, which are created once a year. There are no follow-on accountability measures in place. And our view is these things ought to be living discussion generators, as in that example with Mark and Allie, where they see this stuff and they actually have a conversation. They help each other close prospects, or get more prospects into early cultivation or whatever it is. So this was quite almost shocking, the small number that actually have metrics and think there's a benefit from it. Then we went on and we asked, we're going to have the handout for this. There's a lot of words in this page. We asked, are there metrics that you'd like to use that you aren't currently using, and what's holding you back? And this is just verbatim from the responses. We'd love to look at penetration rate. So definitionally, penetration rate means, at least in our vernacular, if I have 100 prospects, what percentage of them do I make a contact with in a year, or a visit with? There's different levels of this, but in our work, we generally see if I have 100 prospects, I should be able to connect with 80 to 90% of them, 80 to 90 of them in a 12-month period. Close rate is, I've got numbers and dollars. Out of what I solicit, what do I get in? And percent of prospects move through the pipeline, so there's a motion one. What holds you back? Development officer leadership intransigence is holding us back. That's not my words, that's the input words. So somehow, here's a person, has I think a pretty open, more strategic perspective, but for some reason leadership, he or she feels, is holding them back. Another comment, pool penetration, solicitation yield. So this concept of making sure you reach everybody, you're actually getting things you ask closed, counts of solicitation, major gift qualifications, good stuff, but they're feeling that system limitations and fear of creating something too complex is holding them back. I would argue that there's tools, we have tools that just make this not that hard to create the metrics, and too complex depends on how it's put out. You'll see some examples of this. Doesn't need to be too complex, and often prospect research or prospect management can like spin it or run it in front of the team with the field officers, where if the development officers management are effective, they can ask the questions, and then research or management can spin through the data and then quickly come up with the answers on the fly, which drives the discussion. We've seen that work really well. It's a little bit longer one. Until cause and effect or some direct link between the metrics and fundraising performance are demonstrated, activity metrics are as good as any. Not a positive statement, probably a statement of reality. They seem to be the industry standard, are generally thought to lead fundraising success. You have to be in front of the donor, a personal visit, to get that gift. The problem is that metrics are often chosen in the vacuum of tradition. I would think, like, we're not forward thinking, we're not being particularly strategic, we're just using what everybody says, and then altered too often for any kind of behavior change to take place. And then development staff in general aren't data driven, don't have the aptitude or the motivation to track themselves. But they don't actually have to track themselves, and this is put out in a simple form. You can have dialogue, and we've seen it between field officers, between managers and field officers. That changes the game. We then asked other thoughts. One was, I love this one, metrics are only impactful if the organization's culture is willing to support conversations around them. It can't be, we set these up at the beginning of the year, throw the plan in the drawer, and then come back and check it a year later. They ought to be living, like, every month, every few weeks, sit down and talk about, are you getting your prospects move from mature cultivation to solicitation? Looks like some are holding up. What's the deal? How can I help you? Let's talk with the team. How are others doing this? We find it difficult to connect metrics to actual behavior of gift officers. Poor and or altered definitions for metrics, poor data collection can make it tough for gift officers to focus on them when the job is to close gifts by any means. And yeah, there's a, as we do this work, it's really important to have the metrics in a way that there's not debate about them. They need to be simply portrayed, because if they start changing or if there's lack of clarity about where they're coming from, you end up with like thrashing. It's not the best. So we suggest, and so we've observed that there's a ton of focus on activities of field officers, and the industry's saying that's generally not working or doing much, and in some cases actually makes things worse. So if the goal is to generate revenue efficiently, and we'll see some examples at the end, case studies of where this has actually happened, you want to make sure that all of the highest capacity, most engaged prospects are staffed, and that the pools are reasonably sized. And we're going to go through what people think reasonably sized is in a minute. The next question is, you've assigned them. Is our pool of assigned prospects being connected with in a reasonable period, say 12 months? Are we moving prospects forward at a reasonable pace? You don't want them stuck in qualification or stuck in early cultivation. You want them to move through, and we've got some great feedback from the industry on how long this typically takes. The next one is rarely, you'll see in a minute, looked at. Are the asks at the right level relative to capacity and attachment? Like if I have $1 million capacity person who's highly engaged and I close a $20,000 gift, I'm probably going to get it closed, but I probably left $300,000 on the table. So that also ties into yield. Are we closing solicitations at an aggressive level? I would also say at the right solicitation level. These go right hand in hand. But if you do these 5 things, my position would be you're going to do a great job of maximizing revenue. You're going to push the asks up. You're going to get the close cycles tighter. You're going to have great chemistry and collaboration in your team because people will work together on these things. So we're going to go look at the industry. Then we're going to come back and work with a pool of prospects and a development team and sort of look at the stories that might come out. So this is from the survey. What's the typical pool size for your major gift officers, including the qualification stage? And we ran a webinar on this about a year ago where we took data from our clients, and this validates that. By far the majority, like 60+% are 76 to 125. There's a few that are smaller. Often when we find their way down here, it's either principal or leadership giving, or it's the pool without the qualification prospects, which are being handled by prospect research. So when we normalize, we rarely see anything under, much under 70 to 75, usually in this bucket. And then these higher ones, what's interesting, we ask another question. Roughly how many years has your major gift program been up and running? And most of them are 11 to 20, 20 plus years, but there's some of them that are newer. And when we've done our analysis, those newer ones generally are the ones that have to have the higher pools because there's less of a culture of giving. the average gift size is smaller, the velocity is quicker, and you will not justify the field officers if you're assigning this level to an early on pool. But most of those early on programs, over time, the pools come down and settle into this range, which is pretty normal. So the data here validated our webinar from a year ago, which is up on our website on the resources page, and also our empirical findings with our clients. So then we asked, how many stages do you manage your assigned prospects across? And pretty much 4 to 6, which is what we recommend. That's like 80%. And we asked a related question, what do you call them? There's a variety of names, qualification, identification, whatever, but the bulk, most of the survey is qualification, early cultivation, mature cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. Then we asked, do you manage and discuss with your team how long it takes prospects to move from one stage to the next? If so, what's your standard timing? This actually surprised us. Only 40% did and 60% didn't. And there was some data too that even the ones that tracked this often didn't use it with the field officers in the discussions. So it was tracked but then really not used, which we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. But the cool thing is the data that we saw, some of the comments that came in, is fairly consistent. Qualification or discovery, whatever it's called, is like 6 months or so. Cultivation, 1 or 2 stages. It's a 2-year process. If it's early and mature, it's a year in each. Here's one where it's just together 24 months. Here's another one, 18. And here's 2 years. Then solicitation, 6 to 12. 3 months tops. That's probably aggressive. Normally we see 6 to 12. Here's 6 months, 1 year. So in general, we would take this data and say it's typically 3.5 to 4 years from qualification start to solicitation close on average. And it's usually 6 months or so in qualification, a year in early cultivation, a year in mature cultivation, 6 months to a year in solicitation, either closed in or out. So we're going to have this data later on in a summary form with all of this. But that actually validated kind of what we're seeing in our clients and the position we've taken on this. So next we asked, do you compare your solicitation ask levels to the expected ask amounts, which can be calculated from the prospect's capacity and attachment? So the idea here is somebody's got $1 million capacity and they're highly engaged, they should be worth more than somebody's got $1 million capacity who's disconnected. And by attachment, we mean they've given to the annual fund consistently, they've come to reunions, they've been to events and whatever else. That would be high attachment or high engagement. Disconnected would mean they're not doing those things. Here, 70% don't compare this, 30% do. And a bunch of comments. This is a good idea. Gift officers refer to capacity ratings, but define ask amounts completely on their own. Like, why? I mean, especially if you measure yield, and I'm going to be measured on closing things, I'm going to ask low because I want the things closed, but you don't want that. You want them closed at a reasonable level. Another comment, we can identify, if we did this, we'd identify sandbagging, get realistic asks, etc. This is tracked and has been discussed, but it hasn't been very successful as the gift capacities are malleable based on calculation methods or recency of the screening. So yeah, this is the issue here. This is never, we're going to go through a scenario on this, but this is never going to be 100% accurate. It's going to be a directional thing. And like, yeah, any one prospect, you might have the expected ask may be completely crazy relative to what they actually would give. And that has to be vetted, and the field officer should be able to discuss it. But in general, you're going to get patterns and directions on this. Now, we should be doing this. It would help to validate the ask amounts. Then we asked, do you track and discuss what percentage of your actual asks are getting closed? If so, what do you consider a good yield over a 12-month period? 45% don't track it, which is again surprising because most commercial sales teams in the other world would totally track this. And when it's tracked, good performance, 26 to 35, over 35. We typically, if it's balanced with appropriate ask levels, we're seeing, a quarter to a third, 20 to 30%. Comments. We track this for projection purposes. That'd be one of these, but not for performance. We don't, but we should. It's tracked. We close somewhere between a quarter and a third. That's typically what we see. Unfortunately, it's not discussed very often. Like, I would ask, why not? I mean, this is pretty key. Like, you've got to get these things closed. I tracked it for a bit, but leadership didn't seem interested in this metric as of yet. I'd love to talk with that leadership. We'd have some healthy discussion. We'd be respectful and friendly, but this doesn't seem right. 1/4 to 1/3. We know that we should, but it has not been operationalized at this point. In these system issues, there's tools like, that's what we do. We can easily come in and operationalize this because the data for this is in the database as long as the proposals are in there and whatnot. And here we just want to say these last two, solicitation level and yield, trade off with each other. Measuring just one can cause problems, and we've talked about that. Like, if I'm measured on yield, I'm gonna like ask low because I'm gonna get the things closed. And the problem is the $1 million donor who should be making a $300,000 gift. If I ask $20,000, I'll highly likely get it closed, but I'm leaving a ton of money on the table, which is clearly what is not desired. So we're going to come back at these and now look at a story. So switching gears, let's do a review of our development team. And we're going to take the principles of, appropriate penetration levels, movement through stages, asking at the right level, closing at the right level, and take a look at this. So here's what we typically see going in, and this is what the survey said. We've seen most teams focus on development officer activities across fiscal year periods. So you're going to have a list of the field officers, Heather Ashford, Daniel Asnis, how many visits this fiscal year to date, how many visits in the last month is typical, how many contacts a year, how many contacts the last month. And if you look at this, let's look at 3 people. Daniel Asnis, 31 visits fiscal year to date. Let's say it's the middle of the year, so it sounds reasonable enough. John's done 37, a little bit more. Kimberly Lloyd is lagging a little bit at 19, so it looks like your star here is John. We would suggest, if you're going to use visits, which is a reasonable thing to look at, put it over a standard time period, like the last 12 months, because this doesn't have the problem. You've got like 100 if it's June, and you've got 15 if it's August, and the prospect actually feels the year period. They don't really care about a fiscal year period. They just know nobody's contacted me in a while. Or they know somebody contacted me recently. It doesn't matter that we just cleared June 30th. So we stick in a few more columns. Keep the old ones, but stick in visits in the last 12 months. Unique visits, we'll come to this in a minute, and contacts in the last 12 months. So here, John's actually accelerated a little bit. He's got 104, and looks like he's been busier recently, he must have been. And Daniel's 78, and Kimberly's fallen a little bit even further behind. If you put this into a graphical view, it's a little easier to see. So this is where dashboards and stuff like we do helps, because you can quickly see that, hey, yeah, John's like one of the best, Gretchen's up there, and here's a Kimberly falling behind. And at this point, we look at Michael Ortiz. We'd fire him. I mean, if you're measuring visits in the last fiscal year to date or the last 12 months, he hasn't been visiting people. Let's get rid of him. And just, we're going to keep an eye on Michael because he's actually done some other things really well. But this metric, and if the metric is revenue generation and visits, he's failing on visits, clearly. We don't fire him yet, though. So unique visits is better. So this is the first number of visits last 12 months. John's doing great out of the 3. Unique visits in the last 12 months means how many unique people has he visited? Well, he's visited 41, which is below the target of 50. Most people can visit, a good performance if you visit 50 people in a year, unique people. Daniel Asnis looks like most of his visits are unique visits. He's leading the pack. And here's Kimberly. She's actually picked up. She's not much different than John on this measure. She's visited 39. John's only visited 41. So what's up with John Brown? Well, this is the gaming thing. This is what one of the comments mentioned. So John has had 17 visits with Cortez Wims and 16 with Floyd Agrawal. So I would want to sit down with John and say, hey, John, what's going on here? Who are these people? Maybe they're your best buddies. What's going on? Because this is an example of gaming the metrics. So he's winning on this one, but he's not doing so good on this one. So let's keep our eye on John, too, because at this point, we're about to fire Michael Ortiz because he's not visiting anybody. And John, who looked good on the first thing, now we're getting a little concerned that he's gaming the system. So let's keep going. This is strategic. This is back to this question. You're measuring these things. This is actually prospect cultivation. And so we'll come back, we're going to look at these, instead of the visits, we're going to shift and look at assignments, are we balanced, our penetration, movement, solicitation levels, yield. So here's an example of pool balance. Joseph Haber, he's one of our field officers. He's got 98 assigned prospects. In terms of where they are, there's 4 in stewardship, 21 in solicitation. Well, this is good because if he closes, say, 1 and 3, he's going to get 7 closed. And 7, 8, 10 per year is a good close rate. And once they close, they're going to close in or out. They need to be replaced by the ones in mature cultivation. Well, 24, that'll replenish this, and 20 will replenish this, and the cultivation are a little faster in and out. So this, to me, looks like a good pool balance and a good number. 98 is a good number. And so we generally, when we look at do this work, we want to see the percentages like, maybe 20 or 30-ish here, but 20, 25 across these stages, and that works. And again, there's a whole webinar on this from a year ago up on our website on the resources page. So we're like, Joseph, good balance, you've got the stage balance working well. Then this is something called penetration. So once we've assigned the prospects and we're looking if they're in the right stages, we want to make sure they're being connected with. So what we've got here is Heather Ashford. The width, this is her pool. That's 100% of it. It looks like the color goes up to 95%. The width is how many prospects she has. So Heather has a lot more than, say, Tracy Roberts or a buddy down here, Michael Ortiz. And the dark blue is they have a solicitation active proposal and have been visited in the last 12 months. So it looks like maybe 10, 15% of Heather's. This blue means they have an active solicitation, but they haven't been visited in the last 12 months. The green is they've been visited in the last 12 months, but don't have a solicitation. And this orange or peach or whatever it is they've been contacted in some way, but it's not a visit. So there's a lot of stories in this. Like these top 2, Heather and Gretchen, have like big portfolios compared to a number of their peers, and they've got an awful lot of solicitations that haven't been visited. So this is just telling stories. I will want to sit down with them and say, how is this possible? And by the way, you're not actually making a lot of, or you're not putting stuff in the system about the other ones that you've contacted, right? You've contacted these people, but it's very small. Here's Tracy Roberts, looks more balanced. I mean, she's got maybe a 20% have been visited, a smaller group's been solicited and not visited, another group's been visited. Half of her pools had a visit or an active solicitation. She's got another like 30, 40% she's contacted. She's at 81%, which is good. And you can run down the list here. Whoops. Lost my place, hit the wrong button. So let's focus in on Michael Ortiz. So this bar, he's connected with, in one of these ways, 62 out of 104, which is 59%, which is lower than you'd like. And, as we count this, his efforts include the actions of Michael and others. So he's actually looks a little bit better than on his horrible visits number, because it looks like he got the dean or some other people engaged, because there have been more than 3 visits in here. But it's still, he's not doing a good job of reaching people. And he's got a big group of solicitations here that haven't been visited. So I would start having questions about that. And the other issue is all this gray over here is uncovered potential. Like they have not had any contact of any kind in a year, yet they're assigned. So there's a bunch of sub-discussions here you'd want to have about why all this blew up here, how come you're not getting to all these people? And this kind of a tool drives a discussion not about the visits that you've had, which is what the visit metrics does. You can talk about the dinner last week and the lunch, but this drives a discussion about the ones you haven't visited. So let's take a look at how we do that. I'm going to just click and open up this live. I'm going to load some data, pulled from my CRM system, and we're going to focus in on Michael Ortiz and look at who are these people that he's been assigned and has not had any connection with in over a year. It's like 60% of his pool. So pretty easy to do. Same graphical display we had in the PowerPoint. I'm going to hide the panel over here. So I'm going to now click on Michael. He's right here. Again, it looks like he's got 60% coverage. Let's click on him. I drop to him. I'm now going to grab the ones that have had no proposal, no contact. So I grab the purple part of his pool, which is 42 people. Let's see who they are. So this is designed. It's got a set of pages that are different aspects of working with the pool. And we're on the prospect penetration pool page. And we've got these 42 from Michael. I want to now see who they are. So I click on the list. And this will give me the actual list of his assigned prospects who he's had no connection with. And they're sorted alphabetically. Catherine is his prospect, a 5 to 10 million rating. Engaged, so there's a metric we're running that's counting, has she been making gifts recently, has she been to events? Yeah, she's pretty engaged. She's given 5,000 total like, which is really low. She's a parent, PO4. There's no ask amount. There's a calculated expected amount. We'll come at where these come from in a minute, but this is calculating off capacity and engagement. So it's an expected amount in Los Angeles. No visit with this person. Here's another one. Let's take a look. Just scroll down. Here's Ashiel Dempsey, 50 million capacity, engaged, only given 5,000, spouse partner. A big expected ask. It jumps here because of the capacity and the engagement. Lives in Chicago, no visit. Here's another one. Catherine Kitchen, 1 to 5 million, highly engaged. This person's been to a lot of events, reunions. Given 20,000, well, that's good. An alum of 86, 400,000 expected ask, lives in London. Let's look at Catherine. I mean, what's going on here? If I click Catherine, I'm going to go over here to the contact details page. So this is all the contacts with Catherine that had ever happened. Obviously none in the last 2 years. Looks like there were 3 in 2014. An off-campus visit for cultivation, some correspondence about stewardship, an off-campus visit for cultivation. So something's happened. Who did these? The contactor was Audra Perclipsey, who I'm not sure who she was, but maybe she's the NGO that had Catherine Kitchen before this. What's her giving history been? Interesting. So now we're down to Catherine, looking at her giving history. She's given like 9,000. Looks like de minimis amount, 1,000 a year. Remember, she's got a high capacity. She's highly engaged. Looks like in 14 she jumped to 5,000 when that 1 year when those visits were happening. Then in 15 it was nothing. In 16, which is almost done, nothing is either. So I'm going to sit down with my buddy Michael and say, Michael, what's going on here? Like, why aren't you connecting with people like Catherine? It looks like when we connected, we got her giving up, and she's got a huge potential to go way beyond this. This is unacceptable. And that's how the data, coming out of something like this, gets you into a story, because you actually care about this, because this is all uncovered potential. There was like a huge 50 million capacity. There's Catherine. There's a bunch of people in there that it's unacceptable if we're assigning you this pool for you not to cover those people. What's the problem here? So let's move on. Movement through stages. So this is a chart. It's looking at the entire team's pool of prospects from how long they've been in the stages, from like not long to really long, 30 months by stage, qualification, early cultivation, et cetera. And each of these bubbles is a prospect. So this prospect is Sammy Keneally. Tracy Roberts has that prospect. There's a anticipated ask or expected ask amount of 10 million, must be high capacity engaged. It's been in early cultivation 20 months. It's a long time, but each of these bubbles is a prospect. And what you might want to do here is these group down here have been stuck in qualification over 6 months. Who are they? Circle them, bring up the list. Well, they're concentrated. There's 171 of them in my pool. I care about this because why are they there so long? And they're concentrated. It looks like Francesca, Amanda, Reed, Alicia, and Justina, and maybe Tracy have the bulk of them. So let's look at, like, for example, focus on Amanda. She's got 25 of her pool in qualification more than 6 months. But she has a big pool. She's got 80 in qualification, which is too many, and 25 are stuck there. She's got a bunch of them moved to early cultivation. She's got a huge drop. This is really weak. Now this, if she can close them, is not bad, but she's going to have trouble refilling it next year. So all this relates together. And so with Amanda, we'd have a conversation about what's happening here. And maybe we should reduce your pool size a little bit or get some help from prospect research and moving these things along faster, because this isn't helping either. They got to be qualified in or out faster, and this is way outside the norm. So another thing we want to move on to is looking at solicitation levels. So we just looked at, pool balancing, penetration, movement through stages. This is, are the ask levels reasonable relative to expected value? And we have a whole nother topic on this, but we calculate expected value by taking the capacity, multiplying it by attachment, and subtracting gifts in the last 7 years. It could be 10 years. You have to look at how the capacity ratings are calculated, but generally this works. It needs to be adjusted for the individual data sets. But here's 3 cases. 1 million capacity, highly engaged, no recent large gifts, expected value of 300,000. Same capacity, highly engaged, but they just made a $200,000 gift 3 years ago. It's lower, 100K. 1 million capacity, disconnected. This person has not been coming to reunions, has not been coming to events we put on, has not been giving to the annual fund, no recent large gifts, expected value 20,000. What this says, so I have this person, I ought to be shooting for 20,000 because that's a great opening gift to get them moving. But if I ask this person for 20,000, I've just left 280 on the table. If I ask this person for 300, I'm highly unlikely to get the gift. Now, again, it's data, so there could be other stories, but in general, this is how you want to look at this. So let's look at a hypothetical pool. This is John's portfolio, John Smith. He's only got 10 prospects. It's a small pool for illustrative purposes, but he's got Jim Major, who he's asking $1 million to. There's a calculated value from the prior page of 4.6 million. So if I'm the manager, I'm going to push John on why are we only asking Jim for $1 million? I mean, and we had a real example of this where there was excitement about $1 million pending close, but it was a person with like a 25 million plus capacity. It already given 13 million. It was highly engaged in the organization. We're like, why isn't this 10 million? And can't there be a naming convention or something that fits their interest? So that's the kind of discussion that comes out. The $1 million may be fine, but you at least want to have the discussion. And again, with Sue Johnson, you know, we're calculating 450. You're asking 100. Certainly $1 million would be a stretch like this one, but that looks a little low. And then this one looks maybe a little bit of a stretch, lower capacity, less engaged. What do you think? So anyways, John's got, you know, $1,150,000 an ask out, and the whole pool totals 9.5 million. Now, these expected values here aren't all going to come in 1 year. There's liquidity factors, so usually these capacities are a multi-year thing. So we generally would take another concept called the current year expected value. So if we don't have better liquidity data, we just divide by 7. So it's a saying that this 9.5 million is going to come in 7 1.4 million chunks, and we can figure out at the, you know, the prospect level what that looks like. But what you'll want to see if you're going to close, you know, a third of what you ask, you'd like this to be 3 times this, because this is what you think you can get. This is what the numbers are telling you. This pool can give you each year. This ought to be, the ask ought to be 3 times this, because when you close 1/3 of it, you'll get this. So this total ask amount relative to this expected current year amount looks low. It's 0.8. We'd like to see 2 to 3. And this would drive a discussion because it's the field officer's job to pick who to solicit in any given year. So this could come up if I asked a higher ask level for Jim Major. Well, I would jump and like, what about Julius Caesar or John Adams? They may not be alive anymore. I'm not going to say that. What about them? Could we bring one of them forward this year? That would totally help the cause. So that's a discussion at the individual field officer level. You want to just make sure that this is coming in reasonable relative at the entity level and to the whole pool level. But for a group of field officers, you start seeing, you know, structural issues. You see bias in it. So this is taking the data for all of the team and just looking at the ratios they're at of the ask to the current year expected value from 0 to the high is 3. And Francesca Peachtree is way up at 3, and Heather Ashford and Janet Harriman are like really low. And actually the point here is 60% of the fundraisers, this whole group here, appear to be substantially under asking. So that's a management issue if that's happening. You know, any one of these could be off, got it. But here you've got an entire group that looks just structurally low versus the value of the pool they've been assigned. So this chart helps get at that discussion if it's used appropriately. Another way of looking at the same data, and by the way, here's John Brown. We were worried about him a little bit from his Jim and the visits thing, and it also looks like his coverage ratio, he may be under asking a little bit. So we're sort of noting things as we go through this. This is the same data. Instead of a bar chart, it's called a heat map. So the coloring is the same. So Nancy Barrios was way up there. She's way up here. She's green. It's now also sized by how much her ask is. So she's got a lot of ask. She's like 90 million. She's got a bunch of ask out here. So she's big and green. You like big green. You don't like small reds. And so if I'm looking at this, I start seeing structural imbalances in my pool. Like down here, the law program and the mayor program, a lot of small red things. And often we see this in satellite efforts where they're not getting the same focus. And this ought to be a discussion that it looks like you're under asking both in amount and in ratio. Then up here, the VP of Development, Tracy Roberts, is a ton. She's big, but she's orange, so she's under asking. She's like at a 0.67 level. And so we'd have a discussion. Often our clients would like us to turn the VP's box green. We say, well, we're not going to do that. The actual issue is often the VP gets too many prospects, and they have the very, very top of the pyramid, which are going to create a huge, current year expected value. And if they're focused on lower level ones, they're not going to get them close or solicited. So they often do turn red, and we need to get some of these assigned out somewhere else. In the leadership giving, Nancy's looking pretty good. Francesca has a smaller total solicitation, but she's bright green, so she must have lower capacity or less engaged people. Looks like she's doing pretty good. Now let's look at John. So I clicked on John, and here are his deals colored in blue across the entire portfolio of deals or opportunities or solicitations. And what you see is he's actually doing really good at moving things through stages. Like he's closing things faster, his verbal commit comes quicker, solicitation quicker, all of these stages. So there's a clue here that this guy seems to be jamming the visit system. He seems to be under asking, and he seems to be moving things along really well. And let's see what his yield is. My suspicion is he probably has a really high yield. So let's move on to yield. So yield in total for this group is really strong. It closed 82 million accepted out of 246 asked, which is a third of the ask is accepted. That's great. But most of the asks are low versus the expected value. We're using the same color, so the red is low ask to expected value, and the green is high. So what you see jumps. All the ones at the top are the ones with the lower ask to expected value ratios. And our buddy John, now we're getting some clues as to what's going on. It's really high. He's closing almost 80% of what he asked, moving it through the pipeline really well. But he's got a low coverage ratio, so we need to have some discussions. He doesn't look so good at this point. He looked great when we looked at visits fiscal year to date, but now we're like, John, you've got this great pool, and what's happening here? So next thing, we're going to put them side by side. So here's that first bar chart of ask to expected ratio, and we're colored by this, and here's the yield, just the charts from the two prior pages. We're going to look at a few things. Our buddy Michael Ortiz. So we've learned that Michael isn't so good at visiting people. He's actually got a bunch of his pool he has not connected with and should. But this guy's actually doing really good at asking aggressively against his pool and closing. He's actually one of my best performers at this level. So Michael seems to be a really good closer. We should never have fired him because he wasn't doing visits, but he's going to need help. He's not good at building the early stages. So we've seen that from the other data. So we might want to team somebody with him who's good at doing that because he's clearly good at this. And then there's our buddy John Brown. He's kind of fallen off. He was really great at the beginning, but now we have a little bit different view of him. He's closing, but at really low levels. Here's the other. Daniel Asnes was doing great on the visits. He's closing awesome, but he's really under asking. So we need to have some different conversations. And so what I would do with this is I would take, here's 4. Francesca's got great, she's really pushing the ask, and she's closing pretty good too. She's like at 0.15. You'd like it to be a little higher, but she's asking really well. Amanda, asking really well. She's closing pretty good. Michael, we talked about, and here's Don Bastilius, asking pretty well and closing pretty good. So I would pick these 4 as my best practices. And it's very different than the ones we started looking at when we looked at visits. And here's the numbers for him. I mean, Michael's numbers are, he's asked 3.8 million against a current year expected amount, that's the calculated amount of 2.3 million. That's how he got this 1.6 ratio. He actually has 1.5 accepted, which is a 41% close rate. Way to go. And all of these are good. Francesca's is lower, but her ratios are really good. She's got to be lower because she doesn't have the same prospects that these others have. So these are, I would say, these are some of my best performers. What I would do with them is get them in a room with the team and focus on the positive. Have each of these people share with their peers how they achieve both strong solicitations and strong yields. Use the data to get the stories out. And this openness and transparency is key. This should not be a dialogue between a manager and a field officer. It should be a team discussion about how this actually transpired. And it's okay to say, hey, Michael, your visits and your cultivation aren't so great, but your close is awesome. Let's learn from that, and let's play off the strengths. And this should be a positive success versus a negative failure, and that's when we see it work really well. So just to summarize the performance metrics, and this presentation will be available, 100 to 150 active prospects for a reasonably mature pool is great, sometimes lower, sometimes a little higher. You saw that earlier. 75 to 120 in-person visits in the last 12 months is pretty good production, but we much prefer to see 80+% penetration. At least 80% of the assigned prospects are contacted in the last 12 months, and at least half of them are visited and or actively solicited. So sometimes you can have a lot of dialogue on the solicitation phase, which is why we throw that in. But if some of those were way out of balance there, you saw that earlier. Efficient movement through stages, typically less than 6 months of qualification, 8 to 24 cultivation, usually 2 stages of 12 months each, and up to 12 months in solicitation. 25 active proposals at any one time, which is what these ratios come down to. We saw that with the stage balance. 2 to 3 asked the current year expected value, and 20 to 30% of the asks are closed. And we see across the board, higher ed, healthcare, not-for-profit, major gift fundraising, these are the kinds of measures that good performers can achieve. And using this in the way we just went through with our development team and prospects can really work to improve performance. And we'll give you the data. This is so much better than what the industry focuses on, visits fiscal year to date. It seems that drives, sadly, no improvement, more visits, but I don't know why you need more visits. Let's move prospects through. So if you take this versus what we heard in our survey and what we hypothesized was happening, this is a totally different story. And when you use this for stories, coaching tips, and best practices, uncover the stories, and you have these reviews regularly, at least 4 to 6 a year. It's not set up at the beginning of the year, not managed to, it's managed to. And people say the data's not in the system. We'll get in the system. Sometimes we have to start by managing to getting the contact reports and the solicitations in the system. But when we do that, if you're the one that's not putting it in and the managers are on, you've not put anything in the system, it comes out pretty clear. And there's continual improvement. So here's what happens. One of our clients went from measuring visits fiscal year to date and the other stuff, and they put in a system that tracks, penetration levels, movement through stages, solicitation levels, and yields. And the first year, it was sort of like getting it working. It takes a while because you're talking about behavior change. You had to get data in the system. Everybody wasn't entering it. There was a lot of optimism. The leader was all over it. He would say a third got it, a third weren't sure, and a third were confused. And some of the confused, unfortunately, had to leave the team. But it started driving changes in behavior, and a baseline was established, and some people started getting it, and dialogue started happening. It's like the Mark Alley conversation started happening. And then year 2, this is awesome. More visits, that's fine, 32% increase, but more individuals visited, 28% increase. More proposals presented, 154% increase. You're moving from mature cultivation to solicitation, and you're getting them closed. Higher value proposals, because you're looking at what are the solicitations compared to what I should be soliciting. And you're driving the discussions. Can we ask more? How could we ask more? What might interest this person to ask to donate more? Record number of 7-figure gifts. Overall higher level of performance. Revenues were up 30%. The same team. Like, by driving against more strategic measures, using with the team, driving these kinds of dialogues, and then I have to put a smile. Average data file, a contact report declined. I mean, not really strategic, but it's actually part of the first year, getting this thing and the data in the system and the thing working. So our proxy is that measuring these things, which are making sure you got the right people assigned and the pools are reasonable, we're connecting with people, we're moving them through stages, we're asking them at the right level, we're getting them to close, will drive this kind of awesome improvement, and that's what it's all about. And most of you, I guarantee, have the data in the systems to do this, and if it's not, it takes maybe 6 months to a year to get the team putting it in, then you'll have it, and it's easy enough. Back to some of the reasons why this is not happening. The system stuff is a fixable problem. So is the leadership team intransigence, because nobody wants to measure the wrong thing, and nobody wants to suboptimize revenue. Everybody wants to get the revenue up 30%. It's just casting a vision of how to do that. And that's what this is all about. So I think we finished the core content, and we have time for some questions. And this has been recorded. The recording of this and also the slide deck with screenshots of the demo will be made available within the week, and we'll let you know about it. Yeah, can you elaborate more on the formula you use to calculate the expected ask? Sure. I'd be glad to talk more in detail, but I'll go back to the page where we laid out the premise. That's probably the most technical thing in here. It is this. There's several parts to this. So basically, you get the idea, like capacity times engagement minus recent giving. Capacity we can take from the wealth screeners. They all have some kind of major gift level, or they have some, they have some kind of giving level. And we can also just use wealthy zip codes, because we can create proxies that if you live in Greenwich, Connecticut, you're more likely to be at this level. So it's a rough estimate, but you're grouping people into basically capacity bands, which you can then put a number on. And it's totally not precise. Like somebody who lives in Greenwich, Connecticut could be really poor and not be able to make a gift. More likely they are reasonably well off and able to make a gift. So this has a lot of variance in it, depending on where it came from. The wealth engines, the donor states of the world do a better job than looking at wealthy zip codes, but wealthy zip codes could be a proxy, and we've used them very successfully. Because again, you're trying to drive discussion. You try to say, is this reasonable, what's going on here? Attachment, let's have a whole another webinar on where this came from up on our webpage, resources, webinars. Here we're taking all the aspects of opt-in expression of interest, and we're creating a scoring factor that ranges from 0 to 1, and we're binning them into then groups like highly engaged, disconnected. The things you saw on the list are coming off the scores, looking at a distribution. But the things that come into here in a higher ed institution are consistency of giving in the last 5 years, 6 to 10 years. Is how many years of those years have they made a gift? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matters a lot. Have they been to reunions? Depending on the institution, the reunion programs vary, matters a lot. Have they been to events? Have they been on committees? Can really matter a lot depending on the committee. Did they play sports? Did they do student activities? In healthcare, there's a bunch of stuff we can mine out of the patient encounters, which is which area, how frequently, when, all of that stuff, who was the provider. And so the range scores from 0 to 1, there's some research done by a firm, Quintera, a few years ago. They had the PIN index. And there was another research by one of the major consulting companies that kind of related how you combine attachment and capacity. And we've actually had good luck with our scoring algorithms, which go 0 to 1, just multiply that times the capacity. So like a disconnected person might have a ratio of 0.02, which takes $1 million down to 20,000. And a highly engaged owner might have a ratio of 0.7, which takes $1 million to 700,000. And we just subtract off the gifts. And then you have to play around with this. If you're actually doing this, you have to like take a pool of recent donors and see if this is systematically off. And if it is, you have to adjust the math. So it's an art kind of, but when we get to the point of looking at pools and groups of people, it works really well. And we'd be glad to have more dialogue on that. When you figure expected capacity, how do you measure attachment? Hey, it's a good question. I just kind of went through that. Again, we could follow more. How do you know if your attachment multiplier is one that will work for this equation? I'll actually come back at how we actually calculate attachment. One more round on that. That question about how do these things balance out is you need to do some testing. So you create the math, and then you look at history and see if it actually will come up with the amounts that were given in, say, the last several years. And so you have to, this math is never going to be precise, and it's going to have to be tuned. The way we actually calculate attachment is we create a bunch of metrics on engagement from the data, like members of the last 5 years they made a gift, how many events have they been to in the last year, the last 2 years, the last 5 years, there's a bunch of that stuff. How many student sports do they play? And then we use a predictive modeling tool in our software, but you can use others, of course. And what we would do is take a capacity level, like say $50,000 or $100,000, and so that's a base of people who have the potential to give, say we pick $100,000 or more. Then you want to grab the people who have actually done that, who have given $100,000 or more, and then the math will figure out the weighting between all of those things you put in the equation. They're called explanatory factors. And we'll figure out like reunions really matter, and then also we'll figure out like 1, 2, 3 reunions, it goes up linearly, like 3 reunions is 3 times the impact of 1, but then it starts flattening, so 5 is not that much more than 3. So you've got how valuable a reunion is, 2 reunions, 3 reunions, all that stuff, the math comes out. And so it's then going to take, hey, the guy's been to 10 reunions, that's almost the same as 3, he gets this score. Then he's been to like a bunch of events. These kinds of events maybe count more than those, has given all the last 5 years, and so it kind of has different like linear log, all these transforms on the data, and then it jams it into a 0 to 1 range. Doesn't jam it, it mathematically aligns it into a 0 to 1 range, and there's like a curve. Usually there's a big, in this world, a large spike on the left, like the 0 to maybe 0.1, and then it's like comes down 0.2, 0.3. There's sort of really, there's a long tail that goes out to 1. There usually are a handful of people who are really highly attached or engaged, and there's usually a bunch that are less. And that's how we do it. And it's nuanced to the institution. I would also comment there's been a lot of industry standard numbers out there. And the problem is the things that matter vary. Like we did work at 2 elite private schools. In one case, reunions came out really, really strong. And in another one, they came out really, really low because the reunion programs are fundamentally different at the 2 schools. We've done this in healthcare where in one institution, radiation oncology comes out really high because it's focused on it and there's a provider there that really builds connection. And in another one, dermatology comes out really high, because it's a place that they're good for and people come in and they're spending money and they come out feeling better about themselves. So all these things are nuanced to the organization, but that's the concept. Bunch more questions. What's that one? Can you define active proposal? We define it as cultivation up until it's closed by stewardship or a decline. Yeah, so active proposal. If you go back to the stages, let me flip back a few points here. I'm going to go back to the stage. Oops, here's stages. Yeah, so the question is, when do you put in an active proposal? That the idea here is, in mature cultivation, as you move up these stages, you're trying to understand the person's interest, their proclivity to give, and there's manifestations of that can be documented. In solicitation, you now have identified generally a purpose and interest and amount. You've had some discussion about it, and that's when you're going from concept to actually writing something down and issuing. It's called different things based on the different systems, but an active proposal, active solicitation. You've now got an ask amount on the table versus here. It's down here. It's going to have a calculated expected value ask. As it moves up, it actually becomes the actual ask, which you want to compare the calculated expected ask. But up in here is when there's an ask that's manifested itself in something. Different institutions manifest it different ways. An active proposal would, in some cases, be at the start of this, some point partway through, because maybe there's letters, there's other documentation as it's moving through this stage. That's an imprecise answer, but there's a variety of ways when that happens. But certainly towards the end of solicitation, there is an active proposal on the table, which is either going to get closed in, and they're going to go into stewardship, or closed out, and they may cycle back to a holding pattern, or go somewhere else for a while. Do you have data that would illustrate an average and median the results of organizations that use this program? We should talk. We don't have it published. So we have, at the end of this, there's one example from one client. Yeah, we actually have that, but it's not compiled in a report. That's actually a good idea. So I'm noting that down. Good suggestion. Thank you. I see we're at the 3 o'clock point, but there's some more questions. Can you go over an example of calculated expected value? Yeah, I kind of did that. We can do more on that. It is another webinar. We cleared through a lot of questions. I would say, as we close here, let me go back to our last page. This is a topic we've done a lot of work in. This is going to be up on our website. The data at the beginning is from the industry. The page on this page is our best sense of metrics as they should be applied, and we think it's a lot better than the visits, metrics that are all over the place out there, and we would encourage you to consider moving to something like this. And if you're interested in having somebody help you work through this and work with the data in your systems to get this out in usable forms like the example I showed, we'd love to work with you. That's what we do. And you've got my name at the back of this thing. Hold on, there I am. Feel free to email me, call me, go to our website, and we'll post this out in about a week when we have it cleaned and up on the website with the slide deck. So we're at the 3 o'clock Eastern time point. I'm going to thank you all for attending and wish you a great rest of the day. Take care.